All right, I am now recording, so be careful what you all say here. All right, give me just a second. I'm actually sharing the wrong screen. Okay, here we go. Can you all see my browser here? Yep, awesome. So the entry point for most people with RStudio is the free and open source tools. As you all know, we create, the free IDE, and most people use that in conjunction with the packages, and that's all well and good. But what we find when you get to more of an enterprise solution is that you hit a number of different pain points that cause teams to start thinking about perhaps a more enterprise focused or, workflow that can be put in production, whatever that looks like to you. So we create 3 pieces of software. Together they are called RStudio Team. They each have individual names and kind of individual functions. But the RStudio Team stack, which is here, consists of RStudio Server Pro, which is the development environment, RStudio Connect, which is a publishing platform. So anything you've created in RStudio Server Pro can be published to Connect. And then RStudio Package Manager, which allows you to create an internal repository of packages rather than pulling from CRAN. Your team can then, have an internal repository of packages that you've deemed as valid, and then only use those. So I'm going to jump into each of these. I'm actually going to start in RStudio Server Pro. As you'll see, everything will integrate with your authentication. So I will have to authenticate here. Hopefully my password is correct. There we go. Awesome. So this is the RStudio Server Pro homepage. This is the only piece here that will look different than what you're used to. Once I jump into a session, it's exactly the RStudio that you're used to, and that's on purpose, so you don't have to learn anything new in order to utilize these tools. So let me go ahead and start a session. The first cool thing about RStudio Server Pro is that I actually have a choice here when I start a session of what editor I'm going to use. So I'm not sure if any of you are using Python, but you can actually open a Jupyter Lab or Jupyter Notebook session under this RStudio Server Pro infrastructure. And we did this because we're seeing teams need to utilize both languages, and we don't want people to have to make a choice. We want people to install and configure a single product and then kind of use the tools that they feel most powerful using. So I'm just gonna rename this test and go ahead and start this session.
Quick question here. I
Sure.
saw an option for like how many cores and such. Is this running on our hardware or on your hardware? I guess where is the actual session running?
Yeah, awesome question. So we are selling you the license, and you put this on your own infrastructure, whether that is hardware you have, whether that's a cloud instance. So this is hosted by you. Those toggles that you saw, we're actually using Kubernetes as a resource manager. So you can integrate something like RStudio Server Pro with an external resource manager if you wanted to scale that way. There are a couple of different scaling options, but that's the one we've chosen. So what you saw was, choosing an image for that Kubernetes pod there. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, so we're on the cloud, and so if I start a session, would that like spin up a new pod just as needed?
If you integrate with Kubernetes, yes. It's not mandatory, right? So you could just run this on the cloud instance that you spin up. If you wanted to use something like Kubernetes, then yes, that's what would happen. It would just spin up another, a session somewhere else. Awesome. So now we're in RStudio. This should look totally familiar. I'm assuming you all are familiar with RStudio. So this is the IDE you all are used to. Some of the differences: first, you can use multiple versions of R, and that just helps with upgrades so you don't break anything. I can have multiple sessions running. So if I had a script that took a little bit of time, I could jump into a new session, continue working, and not kind of be blocked there. But beyond that, it's pretty much the same. I'm going to go ahead and open just a generic Shiny application here. Test. I use too many test numbers, so I always have to be sure I don't replicate. Right, so this is a general workflow, right? You open RStudio, you do something, you create something great like this awesome Shiny application that I'm going to run. And then you get to the point of needing to share this, right? If this Shiny application presented some awesome insights, I have to share this. How am I going to do this? Can you all see this Shiny application? I might need to reshare. I have a pop-up on top of the IDE. I'm assuming you cannot see it.
Not right
No,
yet.
we cannot.
All right, let me redo my share here. That is also something I do all the time. All right, now you should be able to see this, right? Let me reload the app. Here it is. All right, can you see this now?
Yes.
Yes, awesome.
Yes.
So I have an application, right? And now I need to share it. And this is where kind of the awesome part of RStudio Team comes in. I don't need IT to do anything. I don't need anyone else's help. If I want to share this with end users that don't need to open something in R, or maybe they, you don't want them to have that experience, all I'm doing is clicking publish and publishing to RStudio Connect, which again is that platform where all of the content you've created, whether it's in R, whether it's in Python, lives, and then you designate different access rights. So if I want to share this application, all I do is click this publish button, and you'll see that everything this code depends on, whether it's different dependencies, external files, R versions, all of that is automatically bundled for you and then recreated on the Connect server. So this will open actually in Connect here. Of course, I need to log in. So that deployment process is really easy, and that's kind of that was kind of a target for us when we built out Connect. We have an older product called Shiny Server Pro that required you to transfer files onto a server, take care of the dependencies yourself, and that that was kind of a headache for people. So a main focus here is the ease of publishing, to be able to get, whether it's a report, whether it's an application, into the hands of the right people and allow them to gather those insights. So now that this is on Connect, I have a bunch of user management tools. So I can designate who can see this. So say this was a report that only a handful of people needed to see, I would designate that here, or maybe a specific group, or all the way down to only I can see something like this. And this is done through your authentication mechanism. So we'll integrate directly with that and grab the groups or the the user IDs that are there. I can also change who can change this application, right? So if I wanted other people to be allowed to alter the code or push changes, I can add them here. Otherwise, they would not be able to do that. So that kind of adds some security there. And then last piece here, I can alter the URL. So this URL that Connect kind of automatically assigns is not very descriptive. I can change that and say, test app. Then my URL will change, and then kind of people can see what this is when I send them the link. I will actually, if anyone wants to see this, I will paste it in the chat here. Oops, maybe I won't. Since this is Shiny, I can designate runtime. So make sure the people that are coming to see this application are getting the experience that I want them to have. These are toggles that if you get into a point where you're thinking you need to change them, we can definitely help think about how to do that. Any questions about anything I've run through so far? I know I just hit you all with a lot of information.
Yeah, one quick question. Is there any maximum RAM size limit for RStudio Connect? For example, in this, we have a Shiny apps.io standard license, and we are provided with 8 GB maximum RAM capacity. So for the RStudio Connect, are there any maximum RAM limit?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the answer is no, actually. Since this is something you'll host, we don't have any maximums. I think, when you get to a point where you're just kind of boosting up the server size, maybe then it's a discussion about additional ways to scale out. But from our end, we don't have a limit on the server you put this on, no.
Thanks.
Awesome. So I'm going to go to the home page of Connect here, and this is what you would see if you logged in. All of the content that I'm allowed to see, I can see here. I can search down. if there's content here, which there certainly is on this server that I don't have access rights to, this won't show up. I'll have no way of getting into it or even knowing that it exists. I'm going to jump into my favorite set of assets here. I'm going to go to an R Markdown document. Do you guys utilize R Markdown a lot? Yeah, awesome. Have you used parameterized R Markdown ever? Yeah, awesome. So if you parameterize an R Markdown document, this is what it will look like on Connect, where an end user can come and rerun this report with those parameters that you've set, save it for themselves, pull it down, do all of these awesome things without having to say, hey, can you rerun this report for me with what I say, Illinois? I want to get those insights, right? So they can come and be really self-service here, self-service, on demand, all of those awesome pieces without you having to iterate for them. I'll have these same user management tools, so who can view the document, who can change the document. But since this is our Markdown, I can actually put this on a schedule. So this is the case for R Markdown as well as Jupyter Notebooks. If I wanted this report or needed this report to run every day, every week, every month, whatever made sense for that specific data product, I put that on a schedule, and I don't have to worry about going back into RStudio, back into the IDE and rerunning this report. That's just going to happen for me. And I can actually have an email sent out to me and others saying, hey, the report's new, go check it out. Or, hey, some underlying logic that I put in the report was met, go check it out. You have a lot of flexibility with those emails. But the auto email with R Markdown is really nice because you can get insights into someone like a stakeholder's inbox really quickly without having to ask them to go open up Connect, log in, get there. You actually just get that sent to them. Any questions about the scheduler or anything like that? Nope. Awesome. Awesome. What sorts of data products are you guys creating? I heard some R Markdown. It sounds like there's some Shiny. What else are you guys doing? Anything beyond that?
I have some questions more like generally speaking about the underlying infrastructure. So
Sure.
like for one, in terms of like the files, so each user on the RStudio Server Pro, like all of the files that they have in their projects get stored somewhere persistently. So when they log back in, those files would be there presumably.
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly.
And then we're often using like GitHub projects, and I'm familiar that RStudio has some really nice integration with like Git, but I've noticed at least using like RStudio Cloud, there's some difficulty connecting with GitHub, particularly if you're using SSH, and even more particular if you're using two-factor authentication. I wonder if there's any like solution to that with RStudio Server Pro, and like what like in terms of connecting it to a GitHub thing and making pushes and commit from RStudio Server Pro. I'd be curious what that.
Sure. Yeah, so that experience will be different than RStudio Cloud. RStudio Cloud is kind of in a camp of its own, right, and still being developed and pieces like that. The integration with Git and the ability to push and pull with RStudio Server Pro is exactly like you would have with the local IDE. So the same experience, the same commands and all of that. So that integration is really easy with RStudio Server Pro. And kind of to take that a step further, you can actually publish to Connect directly from a GitHub repository, right? So say you have your Shiny application in a repo. I can actually show you this since I have it up. If you wanted to publish from Git, all you'd have to do is put that repository URL here, and then Connect is going to scan GitHub for pushes that you've made and then update automatically. So that's actually another way that GitHub can be utilized in this stack. But to circle back to your question, we don't see many issues with that integration with Git, but with our pro products, we do provide support, right? So we can help troubleshoot and all of that if we needed to. But that's not a pain area that I've come across with our professional customers now. Awesome. Any other questions before I jump in?
Yes.
Sure.
One more question. Like apart from R Markdown and Shiny deployment, is it also possible to deploy the book down reports? I mean the Git books.
Yeah, absolutely. So anything that you've developed can be published to Connect besides just
Okay.
a script, right? There's no need to publish just a script, but any content you've made can live here. We have some book down here. We have some blog down as well.
Okay, good.
All right. I'm going to jump into Package Manager here. How do you all get your packages today? Are they just from CRAN? Do you also use GitHub? Do you have internal packages? What does that look like for you all?
We have a mix of all. Mostly we get from CRAN. There is a bunch of packages we use GitHub, and some packages we develop, but most of them are public. So yeah, from GitHub right away.
So the internal packages you've created, do those live on GitHub? Is that how people install them? Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. But certainly we do not have a manager, so the versions of packages across the teams could be completely out of sync.
Sure. Yeah, that's a pain point that we certainly see often. So as I mentioned before, Package Manager is a way for you to create a repository internal to your firewall, whether that just be a CRAN mirror, or whether that is, hey, these 10 packages or however many packages are ones we've deemed okay for our analysts to use. We want them only pulling from this repository. So that can look a couple different ways. But this is what Package Manager looks like. We've shipped package binaries, so it makes installs pretty easy. Let me go to a different, I'm going to go to our internal repository here. But what's really nice for the analysts is that we have this idea of time traveling. So say I have a script that I created 6 months ago, I open it up and it doesn't work anymore. I think we've all been in that scenario before. I can actually go back, and then we call this time traveling back to a date where I know that the environment and the package environment worked, plug this URL into my IDE and make sure that my scripts continue to work, right? So that kind of helps with making this making your scripts durable and making sure that they will always work. We also tell you the system prerequisites, so you can make sure that you have all of these installed on the server, all of these nice features that make the R ecosystem a little bit easier to parse through when you're thinking about packages. Right now, this is only for R packages, but it is on the horizon for us to start thinking about Python as well. Yeah, we find this to be a really good solution to distribute internal packages, right? So rather than having to pull from CRAN, these can all live in one place. We actually also just released a public-facing version of this. So if this is interesting to you and you wanted to kind of play around with what Package Manager would look like, I can get you all that link and you can play around with it. It's just kind of a toy. It's just a CRAN mirror, but if you were curious, we can definitely let you play around with that.
Yeah, that sounds exciting.
I guess, what is the significant advantage of this versus something like remotes where we could point it at a particular Git commit in history, as far as the time jumping features?
Yeah, so it's very similar, right? There's multiple different ways to time travel like that. This is strictly for the package environment. There are other packages in our PackRat, RN, that I'm sure you're familiar with that, capture something like the environment. So if you have a solution in place to do something like that time travel, you wouldn't need to use this functionality, right? It's pretty similar. I would say the main reasons people choose Package Manager are not necessarily for this time traveling feature. It's just kind of a nice to have. The main reasons people choose it are, a lot of teams that are in an air-gapped environment, so not pointing to the internet, would do something like this. Teams that need those binaries, right? So the faster package installs, and then really for the prerequisites here. I would say those are kind of the heavy hitters.
So going back to the underlying file structure, and so I understand that each project can like maintain its own files within a user's account, but is there shared space between the projects that's possible to share space? So for instance, we have like repos or projects in RStudio terms that maybe do like one part of a process, and then the output of that is stored in some sort of shared place, like we use Dropbox or something like this. And then maybe you open a different project or a different repo that needs that as its input to do like another end or another part of the analysis. Is there like a shared storage space within the RStudio server environment that allows like the different projects to share the same files?
Sure. Yeah. In terms of collaboration, we always suggest people to use Git for that, right? So all of that in our thoughts on best practices should live somewhere like GitHub, so people can just pull all of the files that your scripts depend upon. So not necessarily in terms of collaboration, we would suggest using some sort of version controlled platform such as GitHub.
That's great. I would like to hear if Nicole, are you open to fill in the remaining 5 minutes with questions?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I'm done with my demo, so why don't we float these questions for 5 minutes, and if there are more after the fact, we can also schedule a follow-up and continue from there.
That's great. We have another meeting starting in 5 minutes, and some people I know they need to join. So I would encourage. We have heard questions mostly from people that are more close to the development side of things and the analysis side of things. So I'm curious, I have some questions. I have been capturing them in the doc, but I prefer to not use the time with my questions. I prefer to hear from folks that are more close to the analysis side of things to see, if this inspires any use case where you see yourself using any of these tools, and try to compare them with the available free resources that there are out there.
Yeah, and to that point, I'd love to hear feedback too. If there are features that you think would be helpful or that you're not seeing, we certainly appreciate that feedback too. As well as I would love to know if this seems like something that could fit into the workflow as well.
Cool. So maybe I see people being a little shy. So I know that Klaus is a very confident speaker and a great asker of questions. Can I hear any of your thoughts right now, Klaus?
Yes, you can. I think actually CJ reflected everything that's relevant from the analytical side, because that's basically the interface. His work is the interface between like the development of the R packages and the end user. So I guess everything was already asked. I think with regards to the files, why we don't use GitHub at the moment is basically the file size of some of the files that we have. And there's also the question around like, what do we do with proprietary data that we can't necessarily upload? Or it's like, Dropbox is not secure, so that's not a great excuse, to be honest, but we don't want to put it on too many other systems. Yeah, so I think actually all the questions that I would have had were already asked.
Nice. And like Constanza, Uni, George, people are kind of in contact with other stakeholders.
Maybe one question around the time travel. Is this just like reflecting how the repository was looking like? Is it reflecting the entire repository? So for example, we just basically go back in the history of our pushes, and or is it just reflecting the package version, so the library versions?
Yeah, it's a good question. So it's strictly the package environment, right? So nothing about pushes, nothing about that. It's strictly what the package environment looked like at that time. So I think, I mentioned this earlier. We suggest using RM or PackRat in addition to Package Manager to really capture the snapshot of everything. It's not this kind of all-encompassing solution to make sure that you have that environment snapshotted, is what we call it. So Package Manager is strictly the package environment.
Okay, so if I would, for example, have a project that I ran 2 years ago on the status of the repository back then, and I would want to go back, time travel back to that, and it wouldn't necessarily work. I would just have the same library versions and repository versions, but not necessarily all the code would be set back to this time. So I would still need to use GitHub or another solution.
Yeah, you'll need to use something like RM in tandem. It doesn't need to be GitHub. It just needs to be, one of those other packages. Do you guys use RM today to kind of snapshot those environments? Is that part of the workflow?
Now we tried it independently, but it's not a systematic thing. I see also Alex with your hand up, so you're sorry for a kind of pinpointing people. And now feel free, anyone who has a question, to go speak and use the rest 2 minutes.
I also, Taylor just noted that Data Herald is going to start late today. So, but one of the things that we've been sort of working with is database connections. And I'm wondering, is there a facility in this RStudio to have somebody set up a database connection object that then the rest of the team could use in a secure way? So somebody sets up the ODBC files and basically does all of the tinkering so it just works. Yep. And then everyone else can just use that object. Is that possible?
That's certainly possible. And with these pro products, we actually give you our pro drivers, and those are supported by us. So something like those database connections is something we could help you with if things weren't working optimally. I can get you guys some information on that. Those connections just make life a little bit easier rather than having to create them on your own. So that is another benefit of the pro products as well. I know you all have to jump. I see a question on this page here that I do want to address, and if you all wanted me to, I can answer these questions too. But question about Connect free versus paid. There is no free version of Connect. So Connect is only a pro product. There's no open source alternative. It's something that you can test out. So if you wanted to try it out, you don't have to buy it in order to play around with it. But as there is a free version of the IDE, there is not kind of a comparable free version of Connect.
I have actually one further question, and I think because the next meeting is postponed by a few minutes, I think we still have some time to go through other questions. The R Markdown file, you said, like, basically you have a trigger that is, you could set a date or like a frequency it's rerun, or could it also be triggered by updated files? So for example, we have a data team that provides us with like input data, and then we need to connect this data that's coming in with like other data sets that are not changing on a so regular basis. And this, if a file is updated, it automatically triggers the running of this data connection. Would that be a possible, like, is that a possible trigger we could set?
In terms of the schedule, the trigger is going to be the time setting for now. But that's an interesting point that I'll bring that back, because we haven't heard that asked before. But right as it stands now, the scheduler function on the time piece is the way that you would trigger something to run. Okay, thanks. Yeah, so I actually do have to run. I have another meeting, so I apologize if there are more questions. But as you all think about this, I will send over the recording if you wanted to see this again. But if you wanted to do, another Q&A session, I could also bring members of our technical team if we wanted to kind of dive into infrastructure stuff. Just let me know how we can be helpful, and we can go from there. I'll also send some links based on what questions were brought up too, and you guys can sift through those. Let me know if there are questions. Feel free to distribute my email address. I'm happy to answer anything that comes up.
Thank you very, very, very much. We really appreciate your time and sharing your expertise with us.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks, you too.
Thank you. Same to you.
Bye.
Thank you.